when we think about e-mobility and basically all its aspects as part of the automotive sector, we can think of how it can affect the everyday South African, firstly by the need for electric vehicles. The global need, obviously, I'll even call it the push or mandate, is environmental. It's primarily environmental. It's to ensure that the surface temperature of the earth doesn't go beyond a certain point, to which there are several impacts that will affect economies, that will affect food security, that will affect even up to the level of jobs when you look at a micro scale. But when you look at the everyday South African, at this very point, no one's able to see the impact or see the long-term effect of this global warming or climate change. Right now, we are driving our vehicles and not seeing something that directly affects us. So this is, by virtue, a scientific discovery, a scientific endeavor, and it's planning years and years ahead, trying to, if I can put it in short, leave a cleaner earth for the generations to come. And e-mobility obviously being part of the transport sector, and the transport sector emitting the second highest emissions globally out of all sectors. The lower hanging fruit was to introduce electric vehicles, which reduce tailpipe emissions. But there is obviously the counterbalance where we have to make sure that if the tailpipe emissions are being reduced, what is the contribution of the production of these vehicles to these emissions at the same time? So it's a constant tension actually about what the advantage of introducing e-mobility into our economies, into our roads, and then what are the disadvantages of this increased uptake of this type of mobility as opposed to the current ICE modes that we have right now, which also then speaks into the economic component of it. We are under no illusion that electric vehicles are more expensive than most of their ICE counterparts, and that is obviously a big drawback for any everyday average South African, because why would someone buy a more expensive vehicle when they already have their Polo or their Suzuki Swift or Renault Kwid? I'm saying some examples here. And that would obviously make someone reluctant because they don't quite see why I would need to get an electric vehicle. So even the cost needs to be looked at as to how it makes sense. If we're trying to save the environment, how much is someone, let's call it an average Joe, willing to pay to save the environment, which is an impact that they are not immediately able to see and maybe not even convinced of. So the data is there for what's happening environmentally, but the proof is in the pudding in how we actually look at if we're going to be moving to the global mandates, which are external pressures when we consider our automotive sector. They are under pressures from the EU and the UK, just even from the export perspective. So there are shifts that have to happen outside of our control from the state side and from industry side, which will inevitably affect then the local consumer in South Africa. So what does this mean? That's why we have the Just Energy Transition Implementation Plan. We're trying to save jobs. If there is a big move to manufacture, how many of those people can transition to manufacturing EV-related components or even services that come in at the second or third tier? So that's where we're thinking about our average everyday South African, is where do they fit into this, not just as a buyer of a possible EV, but even as people that are part of the workforce. What jobs are they going to have available as part of this transition? What kind of savings are they going to make in owning or driving an EV? Then there's total cost of ownership, which is obviously worked out to be cheaper for EVs on the general scale compared to an ICE vehicle. But then again, you have to have the money to buy the vehicle in the first place. So these are all things that are part of the conversation. And that's why summits like these, they're not just here to discuss great ideas, but to actually figure out how do we deal with this tension of these benefits but drawbacks and find the best way forward for South Africa. Because there are solutions that are going to work for South Africa, and I'd want to say it's not going to look entirely like Norway, which is 95% electric. And I don't think it needs to, because that's not what South Africa needs. So I'll close it there, because there is a way forward, and electric mobility is definitely coming. It's on the way, it's happening, there's no turning back. but it's about how we go forward as South Africans in what is best for us and not the rest of the world.